Back at it, man.
All right, man.
Weekend episode recording on the weekend, so appreciate everybody tuning in. And this will be a fun one. We thought about it a lot. Do we have to blur this? Can I say?
I think you can say it.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to talk about how to fuck up your tech sales career. That'll probably be the only time I say this, so apologies if anyone's worried about it. But I think it stresses the importance of today's episode. Also, I just want to call out, too, we are going to talk about every level here, from breaking in to SDR to account executive. And a lot of them are kind of related. So we're not going to break it down and say, if you're an SDR, do this. But we'll call out how this concept may apply to someone breaking in, to an SDR, to an AE. And we have timestamps below as well if you want to jump around from topic to topic. Chris, I don't know, can you one-up me in terms of swearing? No. I don't know, anything else to kick it off?
No, I think that's all, man. Yeah, maybe just a quick little agenda here. So we've got a couple of these written down. There's definitely more out there, but I think just based on our conversations, there's 5 that we see all the time. And so the first one is when you're breaking in, taking commission only jobs, some fractional jobs, and getting into the trap of ooh, if I crush it here, I'll make $2 million. It's
yeah.
You do the math. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get pretty deep into that. The next one is jumping around from company to company. Probably the one that we see happening the most with our SDRs. They have a lot of success, they crush it, and all of a sudden there's 10 offers dangling in their faces at all times, and it's oh my God.
Yeah.
Not playing the corporate game, letting your ego get in the way of upward mobility. This one's tough a lot. This one's very situational, but important that we cover. Trying to fix all your company's problems, trying to be the hero always. That's another one. And then I think the last one we'll end on is just chasing OT, higher pay, while just choosing to ignore everything else.
Yeah.
So maybe we start with the first one, when breaking in, taking some of those commission-only SDR jobs. What's your take on that?
Yeah, for sure. And just a reminder to everyone, too, if you've already broken in and this doesn't apply, feel free to skip ahead. But, I think for people on the outside looking in, there are sales jobs that are good to get experience. But we've seen students in our platform, we've seen other cases where people are so desperate to get any experience, they take a job that's no commission with the thought of, let me do this for 3 to 6 months, get some experience, and then I'll break in. And I've also seen some of the fractional ones. I've seen some people have success leveraging those. I guess my broader point being, before we even just say no commission is bad, or commission only, excuse me, I think it's really important to say any type of sales job, if your goal is to break into tech sales and you're entertaining any other type of sales job to get experience, one, I would just make sure, are you actively being rejected by tech sales companies and they're consistently saying, we wish you had experience? If that is the case, now I'm going to start to consider some other type of sales job to get quote unquote sales experience. But you need to know that to actually get anywhere decent at something sales related, minimum 3 to 6 months. And when I say decent, I don't even mean good. I mean, you can probably hold your own on a cold call exercise when actually interviewing for a tech sales job. So there's kind of 2 angles here I see when breaking in. It's if you're taking a commission only job to get experience, I as a recruiter am not even going to consider that very meaningful experience, maybe ever. But certainly, unless you have 6 to 12 months of experience, it's really not going to matter that much. So you need to know, if you get that job, it's not a month later you can say, hey, look at me, I've got this commission only experience, no one's going to care. Mm-hmm. But also too, it's if you're not actively getting rejected again and again for lack of experience, maybe you just outright didn't perform in the cold call exercise, your next 3 to 6 months are better spent, if you're still getting interviews trying to break in, on just perfecting and getting better at tech sales specific things like mock cold calls, presentations, interviews, and all of these different things. Because the second your brain and your bandwidth go towards these other types of sales jobs, 3 to 6 months minimum to get any meaningful experience. And especially with these lower tier opportunities, again, some of the part-time cold calling, and we've had some students that have done high ticket closing and those types of things, those can be beneficial. Because again, if you've made hundreds of cold calls even, that's valuable. I see that as more valuable than a communications graduate from some state university, right? Mm-hmm. But again, it's going to take away time from the main thing. So yeah, I'll pause. I can talk more.
That's solid. Yeah. I mean, I led a commission only, sales team. So I think it's not necessarily about it not being good experience. I think it's about minimizing risk, right? And so I think are there jobs that are really good that are commission only? Yes. But I do think that a lot of those jobs are found on the higher end of the spectrum once you've had 10, 15 years of experience and you know what you're selling. You have a book of business. You kind of know the ebbs and the flows of your book of business. Like if you're selling yachts, right? If you've done that for like 5-10 years, or if you're selling like, you know, really, really luxurious houses, like it makes more sense for you to like avoid a broker's fee because yeah, you understand your book of business. But when you're first breaking in for the first time, like chances are you probably don't have like a huge nest egg and that you can just like comfortably like mess around for like 2 years. So I think it's a lot more about like minimizing risk. And when you go into these companies that are commission only, you just don't really know what you're getting yourself into, right? And there were people that were crushing it back when I had my own sales team and they were commission only. Like, I'm not saying that they don't exist. I'm saying that we're trying to help you make the most qualified decision. And there's typically not a lot of data on these commission only sales jobs, right? By the time that the company matures enough to where they have a base in line, where they have to comply with like baseline like laws and stuff and regulations, you have a little bit more intel into like, am I getting myself into a potentially sticky situation? Is my first experience in tech sales going to be super shitty? And am I going to walk away from this saying, oh, this is all a scam, like this doesn't work, you know? I think that's what we're trying to help students avoid, because we see people making that mistake all the time. And I don't think it's an accurate representation of tech sales. The reality of everything is like when you break in, you want to be abundant. You don't want to have to worry about your next paycheck all the time. If you're always in that mindset, it's going to like kind of channel into everything that you do. Like in your cold calls and if you're just going straight into like a commission only sales role where you're like actually closing, like that's going to affect you, man. And so I think that's what it really comes down to is like, if you can make a really qualified decision, even if you're breaking in for the first time, which I highly doubt, like I don't think I've really ever, like we've had tons of students that come to us with fractional SDR jobs with really, really good, you know, jobs on paper. And they're going to promise you, they're going to do all the math for you saying, hey, like, you know, on average, like our team does this, like, you know, they close this amount of deals and you get 15% of that, you know? And it's like, it sounds great. And then you're like, oh, wait a second. If I just close like 50% more, I'm a millionaire now, you know? So it's like, it's like, sorry, that's a little bit like,
no, I love it.
But that's literally what it's like, right?
Fired up, dude.
Yeah. I mean, that's, and I think like, I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I think as you become a more tenured seller, you'll start to understand where you have those opportunities to maximize your commissions, right? But I think when you're first breaking in, it's not the best place to do it. And so that is a great way to fuck up your tech sales career, is to go into that to begin with. So
I'd say last thing too, it's like a great example. We have a student, Kevin, who now works at AWS, by the way, so doing very well. He, I think, studied marketing in college, tried to break directly into tech sales, didn't have any experience, really bombed like a final stage interview, got an SDR job at a respectable enough company, but it turned into one of these jobs where he's making 200, 300 dials a day. Hated that, almost left sales, but with that experience and a past internship, parlayed that into getting their first SDR job at a different company, now has broken into AWS. So again, if you are finding these opportunities, extract the maximum value you can and just define exactly what that is and what the line is. Because you'll very quickly get burnt out if you're making 300 cold calls a day with limited success. Anyway, I think just wanted to call that out. Like within reason, there's opportunity. So
no, that's super important. The next one here is like jumping around from company to company. This is one that we've had to deal with a lot, and it's like a byproduct of success, right? So it's absolutely not like a bad position to be in, but I don't think people understand the consequences of what that means for your resume, what it looks like for future, you know, references for future situations where you're trying to like move into a good company. And I think people just don't understand what recruiters, sales leaders are looking for when hiring for some of these sales reps, right? And I think it stems from, and sorry, I'm going to take, I'm sort of like going to give my own, but I definitely want to hear your take on this too, because you taught me a bunch of like really insightful stuff on this. But I think what it comes down to is like, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, you could jump around a lot more, right? Because the market was extremely hot. I mean, like there literally wasn't enough sales reps to hire. And so everybody was looking for talented sales reps, right? And so it was really, really easy. You could basically do everything under the sun and really mess up things from left and right, and you would still be able to break into the world's best sales organizations. That's how much like of a need there was for top talent. But I think now as things are getting more balanced, absolutely does not mean that there is an opportunity. There's so much opportunity still, but you have to be smarter about the choices that you make. Not just like for your next top tier sales role, but whenever you want to move into leadership, whenever you want to be a CRO or different things, like whether or not you think those things will matter, they're always going to look at those things, right? And if your history now is like you're a top rep here, top rep here, top rep here, top rep here, but it's 5 different companies, it's not a good proxy because they're just going to think, okay, he can come in, or they can come in, they can crush it for a year, but they're just going to leave.
Yeah.
So we just poured all this energy and resources into this person, but they're going to go, and we have to like start over the entire hiring process. So anyway, I think that's my big concern with it. Well, not my big concern, because I don't necessarily I don't see the biggest problem with it, but I think it's not about what we think as individuals. It's about what is the norm here. Like, how is somebody looking at your resume and evaluating you from, right? Like, that's the lens that we have to think about. Because is it silly to some degree? I mean, it's not for us to answer, but like that's just how the world works in tech sales. So anyway, I'll throw it over to you.
I agree. And I think, maybe switching back to the individual perspective as well, it's like one of the things that I see, to your point, if you broke into tech sales 2 or 3 years ago, I saw so many people, myself included, literally getting offers to interview every single day, people offering 50 to 100% more pay. And especially in that phase, it's like, it felt like unlimited. Like, you got restless because it was literally like every day you're reminded that there's other opportunities out there that could, on paper at least, pay you more. I know we'll get into that topic separately. But I also think, for a lot of our students that are breaking into these top companies, I mean, we've had a ton recently. And what happens is, again, are there times to move? Yes. But I think what happens, you get a year or two into your career, maybe year 1, you have a really great run as an SDR, you make 100K. Year 2, halfway through, you get that promotion to SMBAE, you got a 130 OTE, you do really well again, and you clock like 160. And it's really easy to think like, this is the way the world works. It's all you've ever known. You've worked at a great company. I'm sure you've worked hard. Like, if you are performing in the top 10% of your organization compared to your peers, as opposed to at a company where everyone is hitting, that is very impressive, right? And it's a good sign that you can find success elsewhere. However, to all of our students at these really great companies, it's really important to keep in mind, when you work at these great companies, you're also getting 10 times more interview requests from everywhere else in the world. And so it feels like this gravy train is just going to keep going forever. And what happens is, if you're at a FANG company, we spoke to one of our students at a FANG company recently, kind of going through some considerations. The second you go to a startup, because all the startups want to find reps at these FANG companies who are tired of working at a huge company, they want a promotion, the ability to work at a more agile company, et cetera, et cetera. If you go there and that does not work out, significantly less recruiters are trying to find your Series B startup company and poach talent from there. Yep. It's a huge risk. And so that's maybe more to the people where things have gone well, you feel like you're leaving money on the table. There are certainly cases where it makes sense to jump. But I also think I just see a lot of people who are top performers year 1, year 2, or maybe they've been all the way through mid-market and they're about to make that jump to enterprise. And enterprise, which is maybe something we can get into as well, is a very different beast. And the second they get there, it's like totally different than everything they knew. And all of a sudden too, they had a short stint. It's not going well. What do I do now? How do I package this to a company? And a lot can go negative very quickly. You can definitely survive. You can definitely get another job. It's not like your career is over. But yeah, if you're in a great situation right now, I guess my point being, like, take advantage of it. And lastly, the one other thing I'd say is, I've been in situations where, especially this last 2 years at my current company, where the first year I really ramped, and especially being more on that enterprise and strategic side, it takes a good year to even get anything consistently building up. And that's exactly what happened this past year. It was good, nothing crazy. And then at the very end of the year, I had a ton of stuff close and did really well. Mm-hmm. And so especially the further and further up market you go, again, look at peers in your company, but I've even seen peers at my company, past colleagues that I worked with that got to a new company. I mean, I wouldn't call it quite eating shit for a year, but like, we're really grinding that first year to just get to their number, let alone exceed it. But then in year 2 or year 3, a territory changes or something happens and a manager is like, man, you've been grinding it out for 2 years. We've got this new team. I want you on the best accounts. And I've seen that countless times of not only myself, but my peers with, you get to this opportunity, it's tough, but you grind it out, you build an internal brand. And right when things open up or that rep leaves ahead of you that for another company and you were prime position to take over some great accounts, you left because you got impatient and you thought this was how it was going to be forever. So I'm sure we could keep splicing and dicing that or whatever you want to call it, but hopefully that's a good like individual and also company level view of that situation.
Yeah, no, I think that's solid. I mean, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the last point too, but I think it is a byproduct of success, and it's one of the reasons why tech sales is really cool, because you don't have those opportunities in other adjacent fields or areas where you're just like, if you put 150% quota attainment on your LinkedIn, all of a sudden like people are just like trying to hawk you down, right? Like that's a good position to be in. But yeah, I think it's just about being calculated and thinking about like, what does this mean for the rest of my career, right? And we're not telling you to like marry a company. Like, we understand that there's like other circumstances. Like, if you hate your life working for a company, that's a whole different story. We're not even going to get into that. But, and I think I also want to like flip this over to you, like in optimal circumstances. Let's assume that somebody like does not completely hate it, like isn't like on the brink of depression and like really just truly does not want to be at this company. Like, what do you think is the optimal time? Just to like kind of tie a knot on this, because this is, I know, something that people will ask in the comments of like, how long do you think somebody should stay in a role before they can move over to like a different company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the simplest way I think about it is like, if you're hitting and or exceeding your number, and like, unless your market rate is so below the industry average, try as best as possible not to take that for granted, right? It's not a one size fits all, but usually what has happened in my career is I will hit these plateaus where, my first company, I did really well. I really wanted to push for making way towards that enterprise position, and sparing a lot of details, was still a great opportunity. I'm very fortunate for it, but it basically became like, hey, I am 2xing the performance of anyone else on my level for 2 years in a row. Like, what do we need to do to get to that next level of enterprise account executive? And quite frankly, after many months of discussion, there wasn't a path opening. But not only that, because if you're at a big company, you may be up for promotion. Let's say Amazon, right? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, 2 weeks before your promotion, Amazon freezes budget and lays off 2,000 people. Like, there are times where it's outside of your control, and I don't recommend you necessarily just leaving because of that, because you're still at AWS, you didn't get laid off, you're still making more than almost everyone working at a market leader, et cetera, et cetera. But my point being is, like, to answer your question of when do I think about leaving, it's like, first and foremost, do you have a consistent track record of hitting or exceeding, and do you have a good internal brand? Like, let's start there before we even talk about anything else. And at that point, if compared to your peers, compared to the historical performance and promotions of other reps, you're not being given those opportunities, and not only that, you're not being told like, here's what I would want to see over the next 3 to 6 months to get to that position. If it clearly becomes like a carrot that's being dangled with no real desire or effort from leadership to make that change, then that is when I start to take other interviews. But it's only then where I have really worked incredibly hard. I have done my best to like perform for my current role and position. If I have done that, there's consistently no opportunity. And like other peers, as an example, in my situation were promoted in the past, then I'm going to start to get a little bit dicey. Yeah. But again, that's still a great point of leverage. Like, I'll stop because I could go so much deeper into it, but it's like, if you're in that position as well, and something we'll talk about is like taking the first thing that like doubles your salary, or anyone that comes to you and wants to like pay you way more, you'll jump at the first thing. And and I know that's a dedicated topic. So
and I think just to kind of like tie it on, I think like what we see a lot from sales leaders that we talk to and like managers is like, typically they want to see, and I think it changes depending on like how far up that you go. Like, if you go more up market, then they typically want to see a different degree of tenure. Yeah. I think like when you're SMB, when you're an SDR, you can probably get away with like a year of, assuming that you are attaining, that you are crushing it. If you've been in seat for a year, like it is going to be seen upon a little bit like with taboo, but I think the hard line is like anything below a year, and all of a sudden there's questions being asked pretty consistently. Yeah. Right. And then as you move up into like mid-market enterprise, and by the way, everything here is like circumstantial. So like this doesn't mean that you say, oh my God, like tomorrow I'm going to be, at this company for a year, so I'm getting the hell out of there. Right. Yeah. So like, I think it all changes depending on like where you're trying to go, the size of the company. But I think, when you're SMB, mid-market, what we hear a lot is like a year in seat at least minimum. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's just kind of like binary when you're going through the interview process. Like, that's what they want to see, right? Can you still do it? Sure. We've seen it happen many times, but optimally that's what they want to see. As you move into enterprise strategic, probably more. Anyway, maybe let's just talk because that's
No,
a
it's a
whole
good
other
one.
topic.
Yeah.
I just know people are going to ask about that specifically. So
Yeah.
let's jump into the next one. This one is not playing the corporate game, letting your ego get in the way of like moving up, upward mobility, just kind of like short-sighted thinking of, you know, feeling like, no, I'm the best, and like blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'll turn it over to you and we can sort of go from there.
Yeah, this is one that's fresh on my mind. And I would say like now having kind of been in tech for a decade and engineering and sales, like one of the things that was really difficult for me when I was in college, I was a student athlete, engineering student full-time, training with Team USA 8 times a week. And I was just go, like all the time. And this is a broad generalization, but I got to corporate America and I had an internship at like a 250 person engineering company, and then very, very briefly at a Department of Defense company for two months in the summer. And I did not realize like my first job was at a 10,000 plus person company. I had no idea like how much red tape, bureaucracy, politics were even involved. And that hit me really, really hard. The reason I bring this up is, you know, I'm honestly glad that happened when I was an engineer, because I also found out rather quickly that engineering wasn't going to be my long-term path. And I made a lot of these mistakes in a career that I was leaving anyhow. And I see this where, kind of combined with some of the things we talked about early, if your first ever career is tech sales, let's say you're out of college, or maybe you're still, you know, 19, 20, you did car sales for a year and a half, and now you break in as an SDR. Corporate is different. It has its pros and cons, but getting ruthlessly selfish here from a strictly financial perspective, and this is why I chose sales over engineering, I just drastically wanted the chance to increase my earning potential. If you have that focus and your goal getting into sales is to make a lot of money, no company is perfect. Just let table stakes. Like no company is perfect. There's always going to be something, and that's just impossible to avoid. But two, if you, to your point of ego, if you are coming in and you are trying to like belittle your SDR manager, or you hit your quota for 6 months in a row and you're number one SDR in your start group, it's really easy with the limited career perspective to think that you are like God's gift to earth, right? And I say this because I've been someone who's been overconfident, hitting my number 2 years in a row, you know, and exceeding it drastically, et cetera, et cetera. You start to lose touch with the grand scheme of a decade-long plus career. And so like what happens is, and what we see is like, again, you have that blowout year, your first year, you as an SDR, you make 100K the first time, you're feeling great. Maybe you got that new car, or you took a great vacation. You're making more than your, you know, friend in accounting who's making 65, hates their life for 4 months of the year in busy season. You're feeling good about yourself, right? Year two, you start to make way more money. And you're doing things differently. Most top performers we know are not just taking the scripts from marketing and like implementing them and having success. They are doing their things their own, but then you start to lose touch and you start to compartmentalize, or you forget to compartmentalize that sometimes that feedback you're getting from your manager is because they're getting pressed 3 levels above them to get the KPIs they need to be successful in their job.
Yep.
And you get restless, you get overconfident, you get cocky and egotistical, and like, why do I have to do this dumb Salesforce report or whatever it might be? When in reality, if you actually just compartmentalize that you are in sales to fundamentally progress your career faster than 99% of people and make more money in your 20s and 30s than most people can with advanced degrees, when you have that perspective, taking that extra 20 minutes to just do that Salesforce report is nothing. Mm-hmm. And I see so many people that, again, like, credit to you because you put in work to get to this point. But when you're picking an argument with your SDR manager, when you're souring your internal brand and relationship, when you are coming in as like this lone wolf AE and let everyone know how dumb sales enablement or marketing or whoever it is, when instead of all of that, you could literally just tune all of that out, do the minimum to keep everyone happy when it comes to KPIs, when it comes to updating your Salesforce, taking that extra hour or two a week to just get those things done and focus on making more money. There is no other job in the world, at least from my experience, where you have this much autonomy and control over your income. And so hopefully that long-winded explanation just shows how I think people get in this and take it for granted. And again, we're not, of course there's toxic situations, there's rough situations, but early to mid stages of your career, if all you've ever done is hit quota and all you've ever done is work at a great company, it's really easy to think you are God's gift to earth. And it's really easy to forget that it is not like this at, what would you say, 70, 80+% of companies, maybe 60, 70, I don't know, but yeah. I'll pause there. Yeah.
No. Yeah, I mean, I think you just Yeah, you took it all, so it was pretty solid.
My bad.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, that was great. I think
Yeah.
that was really, really good. And we talk about this inside the course too, like, playing offense and defense. Like,
Yeah.
that's something that I've always kind of like operated within, and something that's helped me out a lot is like, you kind of like your offense should be like 95% of everything that you're doing, right? Your defense is making sure that like your management and the people that actually matter, that ultimately will help you get promoted internally, that they're happy, right? And part of that is KPIs, different things. It's something that we teach inside the course a lot, but yeah, just like table stakes, like you're not really special, and there's people that can come replace you anytime.
Yeah.
Like that's just kind of like, that's a Ruth awakening. Like there's a lot of people like trying to crush it in tech sales. Like tech sales, because it is the highest paying vertical in the world, one of, if not the most highest paid vertical in the world, if not like the one where you can make the most amount of money in the fastest amount of time possible, not to get rich quick here or anything else.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying like that
Yeah.
attracts a certain level of talent with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so there's always people that are gunning for your spot, especially if you're like at a hyper growth startup. Like for instance, for me, like at Vanta, like there's like 4,000 people applying for an AE role. So like I know at any given time that like if I start like slacking, or if I'm not doing just like the table stake things, even if I'm hitting my number, even if I'm crushing it, like I'm gonna make some people upset. So why even impose that risk or add that risk if you're already crushing it, right? Anyway, like to your point, take the 5 to 10 minutes or 20 minutes of your day to like get your Salesforce updated, hit your KPIs. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
So
like, cool story. You won an argument with your SDR
Yeah,
manager,
yeah,
and
it's
you
not-
ruined the next 2 years of your career.
It's
like,
not worth it.
great job.
Yep.
So
Yep.
anyway.
No, and I think this ties into the next one. So just like trying to fix all your company's problems, like trying to be the hero, always having a strong opinion on everything. So, this one might be on KPIs as well. Like a lot of SDRs in particular, I think AEs get to the point where they just kind of like get used to it, especially if they've been an SDR for a year. They kind of realize that they can't change the system, right? And you understand that like exactly what you said, there's people above, your manager.
Yeah.
And the pressure typically, your manager probably like hates it themselves, right? Like they probably hate that they have to adhere to KPIs. But what happens is your manager's manager gets a report from Salesforce that shows the team's performance and the individuals that aren't hitting their KPIs. These targets are not determined by your manager, not even your manager's manager. It's probably determined by the CRO or like literally a co-founder or something else, right?
Yeah.
Like the only thing that they're looking at is quite literally a number for every single team. And then they have to break it down, unfortunately, into like what are the actions that ultimately help improve that number, which is close one revenue.
Yeah.
Right. And so just so people understand out there that it's not like your sales managers just sat down one day and said, all right, let's make their lives like 100 times harder.
Yeah.
They probably do not want to do this stuff either.
Yeah.
Right. And I think like some sales managers are a lot more transparent about that, which is great. But some sales managers obviously are not going to say that to their employees. But that's just the structure of a sales organization.
Yeah.
So I think the most important thing, we're just talking about KPIs now. This honestly applies to everything else too. Like you're not going to change much, even if you do have this argument and you win. One, exactly what we just talked about, you're going to make yourself like your internal brand goes down significantly.
Yeah.
Even if you win the argument.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
But you're still like, it's not better for you, right?
Yeah.
And this is something I see SDRs, like it's crazy because SDRs, if you're a top performing SDR, you're only in seat for 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
By the time that you are, or maybe even less, by the time that you are a top performing SDR, you've probably spent 6 months figuring out like how to be a top performing SDR. So now you just have to stay in the seat for like 3 to 6 months more and just do your thing and like spend the rest of your energy on like watching Netflix or relax or something instead of like trying to find
Yeah.
problems with like everything under the sun in your sales organization.
Yeah.
Right? Because your time is limited. By the time that you win that argument, you won't even be on the team anymore.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Like honestly, this is something that I struggle with a lot because I was like, oh my God, there's so many inefficiencies here. I felt like
Yeah.
I could change all these different things. And I had these arguments early on, arguments that ultimately like ended up going all the way up to like the CRO and like arguments that like were in the end, we would get like several people from marketing, different things like on a call. And I made it very clear that like, this is where the inefficiency is and cool. Like I might have
Yeah.
won the argument, but I did realize that there were repercussions to that afterward.
Yeah.
Where like they did not want to deal with me because I was more on top of my shit. And so you would think that that would promote or like put you in a position for promotion or whatever else, but it's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So I think not being short-sighted, thinking about like, I'm only going to be in this seat for 3 to 6 months. What's the highest ROI activity that I can do right now? Is it really for me to, make this small thing in the grand scheme of my career a big deal?
Yeah.
Or is it just for me to stay focused and maybe think about like, hey, I want to make a lot of money. Let me focus on that
Yeah.
instead of trying to change. Anyway, sorry, I'll throw it over to you.
It's great stuff. And I think like also maybe as an account executive as well, I think the other thing of this too is like if you're the person that always has a problem, you're taken less seriously because it's like, oh, here Chris goes again. Sure, what do you have to say? Cool.
Yeah.
And like everyone's like, oh, that's great. We'll think about it. But two, it's like now also if you're not performing, everyone's looking at you like, hey, I thought you had the answer. Everyone's waiting for you to fail.
Yep.
Like genuinely, whether it's
Yep.
at a conscious or subconscious level, they truly are. If you're being that much of a nuisance. And two, I also don't want to like have people watch this and think like, okay, now I just have to never give feedback. Like there is a right way to give feedback, right? And so I think it goes to like if you're, for instance, I'll keep it generic, not going to mention any companies, not my current one, I swear to God. But two, it's like if marketing pushes out and says, this is what every SDR and AE has to use for outreach starting today, right now, no questions asked. This is a tough one, but I've seen it where, you know, I will see that happen. We'll be forced to do different things, but I have 6 months of past performance using different emails or using different outreach that genuinely show it is performing substantially better than what was being given to us. And what I would say in these types of situations is if you're getting like drastic turns like that or things you fundamentally don't agree with, never ever voice a complaint within like 24 to 48 hours of like some new rollout that's happening, because you're only going to inject risk. You're most likely just going to ruffle feathers and make it confusing. I'm not saying don't ask clarifying questions and, you know, all that, but like complaining, saying that it's wrong or you should do something different, just don't. Two, you got to come to the table with data, right? Like in my current role, I actually did provide a lot of feedback about my role and all of these different things. One, in an appropriate form, which was our review. Two, I went out of my way to check with my peers and see their thoughts on like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And again, we're not talking about like the system was fundamentally broken. It's just like an appropriate time. It had been 6 months since anyone had given feedback. And I genuinely wanted to provide feedback on wins, on losses, why we lost things, and if there was opportunity to improve there. On top of that, before I submitted a report, I wrote out a 5 to 6 page thing with very specific examples, links to all the opportunities I was talking about, very concrete, you know, reasons, and also a suggested solution. And before I even presented this to a VP level, I got another manager that I had worked with in parallel to review it and say, hey, tone this down. You should highlight this more. You should do these different things. And I got a couple, even some of my peers, I got them to review the paper and like, do you agree? How would you interpret this? Is there anything I'm missing? And so again, it's like, we want you to provide feedback, but I've genuinely seen cases where like, again, not my current job, I swear, but we had like an SDR tell our CRO on the phone that they were wrong about this outreach. Like we listened to a recording on an all hands and he literally corrected the CRO and was like, hey, I got to make up the name. Like, hey, Steve, that's not how you do it. Like literally said it just like that on the phone in front of our entire company. Story for another time. Yeah. But my point being is like, yeah, just putting a bow on this from my side. It's like, don't feel like you're powerless, but also just know that if you're reacting emotionally to any type of thing that is not working, you're always complaining, you put a target on your back, and you're almost always going to put yourself in a worse situation than do nothing in the moment. Yeah. It's not do nothing forever, but if you do nothing in the moment, compose yourself, you are 10 times better than trying to react and respond to everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you are going to do something about it, you got to go to that level, right? So you got to really sit down and ask yourself, is it really worth it for me to do all this work? Yeah. Right? If it's really something as trivial as KPIs, no, it's not. Like I'll tell you right now, it's probably not worth it. Or it isn't worth it, actually. Yeah. But if it's something that is like really impacting your ability to make money, and it's like really inhibiting like your performance, then I think it's something that you should take seriously. Yeah. But if you're picking these small little battles, there's also the other side of this, and I want to get to the last point here too, but there's also the other side of this is like if you're always the person trying to like fix everything, I mean, if you fix something, cool. Now all of a sudden you're going to get like 5 other projects thrown onto you. Yeah. And it's like now your job is no longer being, you know, an SDR or an AE. You're all of a sudden revenue ops, sales ops, you're marketing. And it's like, cool, like all these people are just like, hey, this is awesome. Like we just have this person that will do our job for us. Yeah. So like there's a lot of nuances to this, but don't pick this battle unless that you are like really, really strongly determined that like this stuff is quite literally ruining my ability to make money.
Yeah.
Like that is the point where it does come into play. But if it's something as trivial as like KPIs and small things, you know exactly what that is. If you're out there watching right now and you're like, don't take this as like us saying, go out and create like a 5 to 6 page document and like tackle all these different things. Like you got to make really damn sure that like when you pick this battle, it's worth like pursuing for weeks.
Yeah.
Because that is what it could develop into.
Yeah, really well said. And that's all I'd say too on the feedback that I gathered as well. That's why I felt compelled to do that, because I thought it was impacting me and my peers and my manager's ability to hit quota. So that's all. Yeah.
And then it's easy to get buy-in too, right?
Yeah.
Like, because nobody's going to take you seriously because you're just one person. I mean, even a sales manager isn't going to like, if the sales manager brings something to the table, that like, this is something I've had really good conversations with my sales manager where it's like they've outlined to me what the process looks like. And it's not just them going and saying, hey, this isn't good, let's change this, right? It has to go through like all the other sales managers, and there's like a whole process for making these changes, which is why it's partly so inefficient. But anyway, let's jump over to the last one. This one, we've actually had a lot of experience with this one, especially recently. So and again, a byproduct of success, not a bad position to be in, but chasing OTE, higher pay, ignoring everything else, you're in a great spot, you're crushing it, you're making good money. You get this offer that's just like dangling in front of your face. It ties in very, very heavily to the second point, but I felt like this is such a common scenario, especially for people that are successful in tech sales, that really messes up their career.
Yeah.
So I'll throw it over. You have personal experience with this.
Yeah.
So I want to get your perspective and then I'll bounce off that.
Definitely for the account executives out there, I think, and maybe we could also talk about the SDR that so desperately wants to be an AE as well. Yeah. But I think even there's also this kind of cliff as well if you're an SMB AE and you want to, get that enterprise, mid-market enterprise experience. And I see people make an irrational decision because, it could be like, there's been a couple scenarios. Like I made a jump from a solid company where I hit almost 200% of my number, like basically 2 years in a row. And then I went to a questionable startup who literally doubled my OTE, and I did okay there, but the whole situation just was not a great situation to be in. And I think, really speaking to the personal psychology of that situation, let's even say you're at a market leader, you're hitting 120% of your number, and maybe, hey, it's a market leader, they're a little bit under, the best pay, but you have the safety, the security of that job. And again, you're 3 years into the role. You're making 180 to 220 on autopilot. And then all of a sudden you kind of get bored, or your peer that worked with you they got poached by Amazon, and now they're like, bro, I'm making like 360, like all this stuff. Now you very quickly feel inadequate. And even if like maybe a better company comes and offers you 300 as an example, as an enterprise AE, but then, a questionable startup offers you like 350. You're almost brought into that because all you've ever known is exceeding quota. And on top of that, let's say you're making like 150, 170 OTE. Someone comes and offers you like 250, let's call it. You're like, well, my base is 125. So even if I didn't do that great in year one, I'd still at least make 170. And this is such a flawed argument. Like, aside from the research that we could make a separate video on of how to determine if that's even legit and all of these different things, it's just like I see a lot of people that if the sole reason you're moving is to increase the dollar amount, I don't think it's a good move. Mm-hmm. If you do want to take a chance on a startup, I think there's validity there, right? Like I tend to like medium to small size companies, just all due respect to market leaders, like the bureaucracy of how much red tape is involved, how much process, that's not an environment where I feel like I totally thrive. And I love the medium to small size companies where they're still figuring out, they're still trying to dominate their market, et cetera, et cetera. That's more exciting to me. But again, it's like, I'm not going to say I would turn down like an offer from AWS if they offered me 400K. That's pure hypothetical. But at the same time, like if I'm going there and I know deep down subconsciously that I don't like working at, huge companies, I'm going to hate it. And conversely, if you've been at a solid logo, and again, all you know is winning, you hear, they're going to sell you the moon. They're going to say, Chris, we just got our Series C, $100 million, A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz, all these companies. I just had steak with Peter Thiel last night and like all these different things. Like I'm telling you, there's so much excitement here. Peter himself said he wanted to see 5 more reps by the end of the month. Like we're growing faster than we can handle. And you get into these situations where not only do you go and sure, maybe it's a wash. Like maybe you do pull 170 in your enterprise role that's paying you 275, 300, but you've had a year of not performing. all that confidence that you had at your last role, I will tell you, regardless of where you've been, if all you've ever known is hitting your number and you scrap to just barely get to like 90 or 100 at this new company, your game is completely thrown off. And this is really hard to see on the other side of it. I'm not even saying that you shouldn't try it, because I do think there's value if you do that for a year or two. Now you know. Yeah. And like some of the ways that I know the perfect size company, like I will never go to like a 20 to 50 person company unless it's my own. But I would also never go to a 10,000 plus person company because I had that experience in engineering that was rough, just not for me. But now I know, generally speaking, anywhere from like 250 to maybe 2,000 people. That's kind of my sweet spot, and I'm happy to be there. And I'll pretty much take any conversations from companies there if I were to be in the market looking for a job. So anyway, hopefully, that helps.
No, I think that's solid. And I think people just forget about the stress that comes with it. Like, just the dollar amount of saying exact. Like, I really like your argument there. Is like that is exactly how people think. Yeah. Is like this is a risk-free situation because I'm going to make what I'm making right now from an OTE perspective, even if I close 0%. Well, you kind of forget to factor in the opportunity cost of like how much stress you're going to have from like if you are exactly that. If you are a top performer and now all of a sudden you're closing 20% or 25%, it's going to mess with you, right? And it's going to carry over to everything else. And I think also salespeople have a tendency to think that they can do anything, right? It's like they kind of forget that. Like I don't take for granted that I'm selling like Avanta, which is like the world's fastest growing startup this year, and I mean, sure, like I consider myself to be a good sales rep, but I wouldn't be as successful as I was if the product wasn't really solid, right? And I think a lot of sales reps think that, if it wasn't them in the seat, that they would be completely like, unable to close anything. Yeah. But the reality of everything is like if you go to a company that doesn't have good product market fit, I mean, it doesn't matter how good of a salesperson that you are. I mean, just think back to like whenever we go out and we buy something, right? Yeah. Like we do enough research at this point. Like when a buyer comes through, especially in SaaS, right? Like they understand how to research things. They understand how to Google search. Like they probably have a really clear understanding of like what your product does. And a lot of people, like a lot of sales reps, especially AEs, they love to take credit for shit that they have nothing to do with. I'm just going to be honest there. Like you read these win wires and you're like, it's like a it's like a 5 paragraph
blood,
like
sweat,
summary.
And tears.
Yeah. It's like, there was just so much effort on all front. Anyway, sorry. But it's like that happens a lot. And then you go listen to the Gong Call and it's literally like they come through and they're like, yeah, we've been evaluating you guys for like 8 months. And they're like dictating, or they're like putting in the agenda and they're saying, hey, like this is what we need from you. This is what we're looking at. Can you please like write an order form? Yeah. And it's like, I'm not saying every single case is like that. Like there's definitely like good deals to be sold and different things, but just remember that going to a product or going to a company that doesn't have that level of product market fit comes with stress. It comes with more, like you do have to go a little bit more uphill a lot of the different times. So like factor in the stress as well. And don't take for granted if you're on a really, really good spot right now and you're crushing it, you really should double think, especially if you have a path up at that company. Yeah. Like don't get greedy and say, oh my God, like I can't wait 3 months. I'm a top performing AE, like I need to go here because they're going to pay me $100K more. Like, really, really double think about the decision that you're making. I'm not saying that there isn't the right times to do that because we've also seen like, I think if you are a top performing rep, you probably have really strong critical thinking skills as well. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely a right time to make these moves. And I will say like, something that I do see across like top performers is when you look at their history, they have actually jumped around a lot. Yeah. But their decisions have been very calculated decisions. Mm-hmm. And so you shouldn't just look at that and say the reason why they're making so much money and being so successful is because they jump around a lot. No, it's because they became top performers and now had opportunities open themselves up to them and they took the time to evaluate those and say, this makes sense. Yeah. They probably had to weed out like 50 other opportunities among all of the sea of other ops that they had. Yeah. So
totally. Anyway, no, I was going to say if I could chime in like one last thing because I thought this was a great talking point. It's really hard to see, and I think I've seen it personally from the companies that I've worked at. Like now I work at a market leader in our space. It's not like an Amazon of the world, but for what we do, we are the market leader. Like we are the premier, like premium solution. And so you forget if you walk into those situations, like even Gong, for instance, like Gong will never be as big as Google, but mm-hmm. Gong dominates is it revenue intelligence is their phrase? Yeah. And they're very good at what they do. It's a great product. I use it every day, right? But if that's all you've ever known, you forget how many leads they have, how many people have signed up for Gong, how many people have done all these different things. And it sounds trivial, but if you go to a hot startup, they don't have 10 years of lead collection. They don't have 10 years of people who have engaged in opportunities and closed lost. They don't have marketing collateral and a constant flywheel of leads, or even forget leads for a second, just brand recognition. Having a prominent booth at AWS reInvent, having a prominent booth at like Google, ServiceNow, all of these in-person events, like people at a minimum at least know who you are, right? And I think people take that for granted. And the last analogy I have there is like even this YouTube channel, right? Like we have fundamentally at higherlevels.com done a lot of the same things and had the same offerings that we continue to improve, but also these podcasts, right? Like we've been making videos for 3 years, and more recently it's growing very, very quickly. And everyone's like, wow, this is amazing. This is amazing. We've said this from day one, but it just takes time for, in our case, the algorithm to know us. It takes time for people to find us and share us. It takes time for these things to really build and become a self-sustaining and growing flywheel. And just bringing it back to the person that's done really well, that's maybe worked at like not even a huge company, but just one that has a good presence in their space. If you have not seen and lived the other side of that, if you have not eaten shit like Chris and I making videos on Saturday and Sunday for 2+ years now, like it's really hard to understand what that's like without that. And it doesn't mean it's impossible, but it is a fundamentally different game when instead of going through your internal database and trying to find some great old leads and gold nuggets, if you're doing pure outbound 100% of the time and you have one really good inbound lead per month that comes in and actually turns into an opportunity, it just gets very scary, very lonely, very quickly, and it's hard to understand. So yeah.
No, well said. I think I think the whole essence of this episode is just to make better decisions, make more calculated decisions, right? I think there's also confirmation bias that goes into everything. Like when you do have a really hot offer in front of you, like you probably want to find every single reason as to why that offer is an amazing offer, rather than think on the other side of it and say, why could this backfire? Like what are the potential risks of me making this move right now? Because this is your career, it's your earning potential, it's how you feed yourself, your family, and so it's important, right? Like you should do due diligence and you should be able to make a calculated decision that's best for you and your future. So I think this was a really solid episode. I think we went pretty deep. If you are out there, if you're either breaking in or if you are in tech sales, I think there's a lot of good stuff here. If you did like this episode, like comment, like, subscribe. Let us know, like, if you want to see anything different than this, like, or if you like this type of content. We're very data driven, so we do look at like what's getting the most views, what's getting the most engagement. That's ultimately how we dictate like what do we push out next. Like if people want to see this specific type of content here, we're gonna make more of it. So let us know. I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, this is a great episode. I think it's important. Like the whole purpose of this topic was for Chris and I to kind of like role play the worst case scenarios. So obviously it's not all doom and gloom, but hopefully good perspective if all you've ever known is doing really well and you are thinking about taking that risk. And even at our community at higherlevels.com, again, if you're looking for a community of SDRs, account executives, et cetera, who are collaborating and not competing with each other for the next promotion, but some of the best people from AWS, Outreach, Snowflake, Okta, et cetera, we have actually had people in our community refer others in to AWS as an example among many other companies. And we have seen people make job changes that have drastically improved the quality of their life and get some great opportunities for them. So again, there's no one size fits all. We're not telling you to write 5 pages of feedback every time there's an issue. We're not telling you to never make the jump, but hopefully this gives you a good case of some of the things, maybe if this is the first time you're really considering that job change, to just take in mind. And comment below. We watch this every day. We do monitor our comments. So if you're in that situation, give us a shout. And hope everyone got a lot out of this one.